Hey folks, today I'm going to show you an upgrade that initially I had not planned on doing, but I kind of stumbled on it more or less, and boy am I glad I did it. That's right, I'm talking about this central vac here in my fifth wheel. Like I said, initially this was not on my wish list to have in an RV at all. It was completely off my radar. But stay tuned to find out what changed my mind and how simple it is to add into your rig. So like I was saying, a central vacuum like this one here in a fifth wheel was never on my wish list to begin with. You know, I'd seen plenty of them, mostly in higher end fifth wheels, but I never really fully understood the benefits until I installed this one here. And I guess if you're like me, I just thought, well, you know, how hard is it to pull out a stick vacuum when it's time to clean things up? And I think I also associated a high cost with them, and so I figured I could probably live without one. But then I stumbled upon an RV surplus store online, and I think they're headquartered up in the Indiana area near all the RV factories, and they were selling these open box units, and I guess they were leftovers maybe from a vendor. They were orphaned, you know, without a box, no manual or anything like that. But the price is really what lured me in. It was only 50 bucks. That's right, only 50 bucks. So I figured, hey, for 50 bucks, I might as well try this out and see how it works. Now, I can't promise you that you're going to get one for the exact same price, but stay with me now because I would have definitely paid more for it after I've experienced the benefits firsthand. So let me hit all those benefits up front, and then I'll talk about the install process. Now, if you've ever been camping even once or twice, you know just how much stuff gets brought inside an RV. I mean, it doesn't even matter if you're not at the beach where it's extra sandy. If you're just out camping, there's going to be dirt and dust and stuff that just ends up in your rig. You know, you can try taking your shoes off before you come in, shaking them off, but stuff just finds its way in. And of course, the problem gets worse if you have kids or maybe you've got pets, and suddenly on the bottom of your feet, you feel just grime and little dust and bits of sand and dirt. And so you end up vacuuming and vacuuming and vacuuming, especially if you got a bigger rig, because you don't want that grime and dust and dirt to spread all over your rig. But imagine being able to whip out a small little whisk broom just like this one here, and then you just sweep up around your entry area, get it into a nice little neat pile, and then with the flip of your foot or your hand, lift that up and sweep everything into this dustpan here. I'll show you that one more time. Or suppose you've got a bigger mess, then you can just take this hose right here and attach it to your central vac, turn it on, and then vacuum wherever you need to. I can vacuum all the way in the front of the rig in the front living room here with ease. I can even reach all the way in the furthest rear bedroom here, no problem. It's got powerful suction, way more than a battery stick vac, and if I need to, I can just change out tools to get in crevices and such. For me personally, this has been a game changer, and I think it's a near must-have feature on an RV, especially if it's a bigger one. All right, so hopefully I've sold you on the benefits of having a centralized vac in your RV, but let me talk about just how easy the install was. First off, the vacuum runs off standard 120 volt power, and that can come in the form of an outlet just like this one here, or some variations even allow you to hardwire, direct wire right into a circuit. Second, the dustpan is optional, but if you choose to do it, you just need to pick a location where you can physically connect the two, the dustpan to the central main vacuum unit, through a 2-inch hose that you can conceal somewhere. And third, you may want to think about noise considerations. This vacuum is probably a bit louder than your average household vacuum. I mean, the suction is quite powerful, and so the more isolated you can put this motor portion in contrast to your living space, then of course the less you're going to hear it when it actually runs. Now, you can see here I've got it on my kitchen island, and I'll comment on that in just a bit. But most manufacturers seem to locate the motor head somewhere in the front storage bay in a fifth wheel, or maybe the basement storage in a Class A RV, and then you'll see a lot of times in the steps, you'll see where they locate maybe an inlet right here on this first riser, and then a little dustpan right there that's connected all to that central vacuum. And I think that's for convenience, but also taking advantage of space that's typically dead in an RV. Those are the basic considerations for the install, so let me share the specifics on mine and why I did what I did and how I did it. Now first, let me talk about probably the most important factor, and that is potential mounting locations to mount either the dustpan here or of course the motor portion of the vacuum. In my fifth wheel, I contemplated several locations, and the first was this back staircase in the rig here, and I thought about putting it in one of these risers here because the vacuum itself is about 6.5 inches the face of it, and most risers, you know, are going to be at least 7 to 8 inches tall. And so that was a possibility. You know, there's dead space behind these stairs, so nothing really is going on there. But then I started thinking about the dustpan attachment. If I were to connect that, there's not really a great spot to run that 2-inch hose to connect all the way here to my kitchen island toward the middle of the rig. And so I kind of scrapped that idea. Then the second location I contemplated was up here toward the front of the rig by the main entry door in this first riser here on the staircase. And this is probably, like I said earlier, one of the most common locations that I'll see manufacturers install the central vacuum. You know, sometimes they'll put the actual motor head right here, but more common I see just an inlet that's attached to the motor head, which is somewhere hidden in the front storage compartment. And then a lot of times a dustpan accessory right next to it. And I think that's super convenient because obviously you've got your entry door right here, and that's where a lot of the debris and the dust is going to be coming into your rig. And so to have that right there by the entry door where you can just sweep it up and put it right into the dustpan, super convenient. Now for me, in my situation, there are some slide out controls that are in this dead space under these front stairs here. And so for me, I probably could have figured it out and moved some things around and made some room for it, but it just started to look a little bit complex. And so I opted to pass for that. But I really think this is a great location for most people. And then especially if your motor head for the vacuum is in your front storage bay, then imagine being able to clean out your front storage bay, or maybe you attach the hose and you're vacuuming your tow vehicle because now you've got 3 points or 3 inlets where the vacuum can suck from, either in your storage bay where the motor head is mounted, or you've got an inlet down in your first riser and then another dustpan where you can sweep things into. So for a lot of fifth wheel owners, I think you're going to have a lot of options when you contemplate locations near your front steps there. A lot of times fifth wheel manufacturers even have lots of dead space. You can see I've already reclaimed some space over here, but this would have also been another option to put the vacuum here if I hadn't already reclaimed that space. But for me, ultimately, I settled on this location here in the kitchen island, and let me tell you why. First off, like I mentioned, you do need 120 volt power. And you can see just below my vacuum is my converter breaker box. And so that's where all my circuits are going to be. So obviously I have 120 volt power easily accessible, but then I also already have an outlet right there in the island. So I mean, there's 2 different sources I could possibly pull from. But another reason I chose this location is that I can then fit the dustpan over here on the opposite side of the island, and I've got easy access to run that 2-inch hose that needs to connect the dustpan to the main motor head unit. And another benefit is this location is about the halfway point in my rig. So when I hook up a hose, I can reach all the way into the front of the rig in the front living room, but then I can also go all the way to the rear in the rear bedroom with no issues at all, since again, it's kind of the halfway point of the rig. And the only con, or I should say at least the main con that I can think of with this location, is that it is in my living space and it's not isolated very much. So when you turn it on, you're gonna hear it probably more than you would compared to units that are tucked away in some storage somewhere. But in the end, I decided the pros far outweighed the cons, and so that's why I chose this location here for my motorhead. Now, your goals might be different, and of course your floor plan in your RV is probably different, and so you may choose a different location for your motorhead. But feel free to leave below in the comments what you think about this particular location, or maybe where you would like to put it in your rig. In fact, if you got a fifth wheel or a Class A and it came with the centralized vac, maybe you think where the manufacturer put it is not ideal and you would move it if you could, or relocate it. And so definitely let everybody know in the comments below, because I think it'd be incredibly helpful to the community. So with all that said, let me dive into the install process and talk about all the different parts and accessories you need to add a centralized vac to your RV. Now, this centralized vacuum is one of the most common in the RV industry. I've seen this exact same unit installed on fifth wheels well over 6 figures, and even on pricey Class A diesel pushers. In fact, I've really only seen 2 or 3 main centralized vacuum models that RV manufacturers seem to use. Now, that being said, this is the InterVac RV CS series central vac, and they do make variations of this model just depending on whether you need direct wired 120 volt or a power cord attached, and then whether it has an inlet on the back for accessories. Now, my specific model here is the CS8, and that means it's a model that has an attached standard 120 volt 3-prong power cable on the rear there, and then it also has a rear accessory inlet on the back for the dustpan, and then takeoff leads for the power on the little LED light. Now, I'm pretty sure I've seen this same model rebranded under different brands, so you might see a different name on the faceplate, but I'm pretty sure they're all made by the same company as far as I know. And speaking of which, as you're researching the InterVac model, the CS series, you want to make sure you get the variant with the desired features on it, especially if you want to add an accessory dustpan with the auxiliary inlet on the back. For the power requirements, it's just standard 120 volt, and in my case it was a 3-prong cable. You can see the black one that's attached to that outlet there. And so of course I just added a junction box and an outlet inside my kitchen island here, since I already had an outlet right there on the other side of my island, and that was just the easiest path for me in this particular situation. And then it also gave me room to route the 2-inch hose just above that. Now let me just interject one important note. Obviously the best scenario would be to add a dedicated breaker for the vacuum, since the vacuum's a relatively powerful, appliance, kind of like having a dedicated breaker for your microwave or electric fireplace, right? But in my case, all my breaker slots were already used. Well, I guess I could have actually converted one of the single breakers on either end there to a double breaker, those little compact dual breakers, where it splits them, into two. But in the end, I knew that the circuit that I chose here, this outlet right here, is already my GFI circuit on the rig. And typically I'm not running the vacuum and another heavy appliance at the same time. And for those curious, the vacuum itself consumes about 850 watts or 7 amps. And so, for me, the breaker will support 1800 watts approximately on a 15 amp breaker. And so for me, I'm very much aware that when I turn that vacuum on, I need to make sure I'm not running another, 1000 watt appliance at the same time on that same GFI circuit. So I opted to merely add this outlet on the inside of my island, which is, by the way, common practice by RV manufacturers. This is exactly how they wire in electric fireplaces and sometimes even water heaters. And of course, everything's sealed up there in the junction box with the outlet cover. All right, so that solves the power problem, but what if your scenario is different? Well, let me give you just a couple other things to consider. And obviously every RV is different, so complete your due diligence and consult an electrician if needed. But if you don't have the luxury of running a dedicated circuit to your vacuum, think about what existing 120 volt power is nearby. Now, for instance, if I put my vacuum head, my motor head here in the staircase in one of the risers, I've got options ranging from the 120 volt power supplying the water heater, which just so happens to be on the other side of this wall down here, or even outlets that are wired into the GFI circuit that I could tap into as well. And like I said before, the vacuum isn't something that's going to be running 100% of the time or cycling on and off all day, right? So although the vacuum consumes a fair amount of power, remember about 7 amps or a little over 800 watts, usually it's on just for a short period of time. So that's why me personally, I'm not as concerned about having a dedicated circuit for the vacuum, especially since I'm aware of what else is running on the GFI circuit I chose. But again, do the math in your case, add up the watts. Of course, you don't want to exceed the old 1800 watt adage if you're on a standard 15 amp circuit, like most of us are. But like I said, consult an electrician if you have any questions or concerns on that. Now, there's a few other things we need to cover. Physically installing this motor head, the unit itself. Now, this is a one-piece unit here, and the faceplate is larger than the body. So basically, it just slides into the cavity, and then it's got 4 little arms on each corner that kind of rotate out and lock itself in, almost like a clamp, clamping itself to that wall there. Now, the instructions are going to tell you the cutout dimensions, but let me give you what the faceplate dimensions are. So in case you're like me and you have something constraining your width here, I've got 12.5 inches between the cabinet trim here, and the vacuum is 11.5 inches wide at the widest point there. And then on the height, the vacuum is exactly 6.5 inches there on the height. And so that kind of gives you an idea of what the cutout dimensions there. Of course, the actual hole that you cut in your cabinetry is going to be slightly smaller, and that's going to be in your instructions, or you can measure it, of course, when you get the vacuum. From the back, you can see where the auxiliary hose gets attached, which feeds the dustpan accessory there. And it's actually officially called the VacPort accessory. I've also seen it called the vac pan or the vacuum sweep as well. But back to the hose, it's a standard 2-inch vacuum hose, just like a central vacuum that may get installed, in a residential home. And then it's just a generic hose clamp that attaches it to the vacuum here. And then if you look real closely, you can see there's 2 small wires coming out. They're actually yellow over here, and then I spliced in and changed it to red and black here. But those are low voltage wires that supply current to the LED lights that light up when that vac port is opened up, the dustpan is opened up there, and it also triggers the vacuum to power on. And so that's what those 2 yellow wires coming out of the back of the vacuum are. You can see I've got plenty of access here in my kitchen island to run that 2-inch hose and the wires easily along the back wall of the island, behind all the sink plumbing, and then back down to the dustpan below. Now I was able to neatly tuck everything out of the way so it doesn't interfere with anything else, and of course looks halfway decent still when you open up the cabinet doors. I did have to extend the low voltage wires. They just come with, I think, maybe a 6 to 12 inch lead on either end of the vacuum, the motor head, and then the accessory dustpan there. So I just soldered on wires to both ends there. And if I'm not mistaken, I think the polarity matters on that low voltage connection there. So kind of dry fit your wires first and test it out. And of course, if it's not working, then you just got the polarity reversed. So go ahead and switch your wires and you'll be good to go. And as far as cutting the hole for the dustpan inlet, that part has to be really, really precise. Most of the time you're going to be working with finished cabinetry like this one here. And so you want to be really precise on making those cuts. And a lot of times they're just awkward cuts. So my tool of choice for stuff like that is an oscillating tool like this one here. These are really huge problem solvers because you can easily just kind of plunge in and cut out that hole. They're super easy to control. You don't have to worry about, something circular spinning and wanting to, hop around. So definitely consider using an oscillating tool like this one here with a nice straight flat blade. And you can just kind of plunge in the perimeter and trace all the way around. Now for those curious on the dimensions, again, I'm going to give the outside dimensions here. So you've got 8 and it looks like 3/16 wide, and then the actual height here looks like 2 7/8, and so that is the VacPort dustpan accessory. And I forgot to mention one bonus tip. When I cut all this out, what I did is just cover everything with painter's tape. That way I don't have to worry about messing up this finished surface here or the floor itself. So I just covered everything with painter's tape and then used a nice Sharpie to draw out my cutout on top of that painter's tape, and then went ahead and made my cuts. And that way everything's protected. You don't have to worry about having one of those oops moments. Now I'll give you some close-up views of everything after it's installed here, so you can see the VacPort, the dustpan right here, and when you flip it open, it just has some magnets inside basically that complete the circuit and then tell the vacuum to turn on. As soon as I flip it on there, you can see it's got 2 LED lights there that light it up so you can see easily, and then this whole compartment is just sucking all the air to the vacuum motor head. And there's the back side of the VacPort. You can see there's just a 2-inch elbow that steps it to the 2-inch flexible hose there. And then you can see the wires going up and all the way around there to the vacuum head. And for those curious, this protrudes just under 4 inches off the back of the cabinet here. And that's about it for the install on the vacuum and the VacPort accessory. But let me show you 2 other things. Now, since I bought this as a closeout, surplus, it did not come with a vacuum hose or all the attachments and such. But the nice thing is, because this is just a standardized 1.5-inch inlet, you can buy pretty much any accessories that you would for a residential centralized vacuum. And so what I opted to do is I found this hose right here, and you're probably looking at it thinking, wow, that hose is long enough to get to your entire RV. And yes, it is. It actually only runs 6 foot long in its compact form here. But you can see as you pull on this hose, it expands drastically. And so believe it or not, this hose is supposed to go from 6 foot when it's all compact, and it's got, some kind of spring-loaded metal in here that wants to retain its shape. But it'll go from 6 foot in its compact form all the way up to 32 feet. Yeah, 32 feet, that's right. So when I plug in here to my centralized vacuum, remember this is about in the middle of my rig, I can go all the way to the front in the living room with no issues, and then all the way to the rear bedroom with no issues. I got plenty of hose. Now the one downside to this type of hose is that as you're stretching it out, it's naturally going to want to go airborne. And so if you've got other people in your rig, you know, they might have to be doing the limbo or hopping over the hose as you're vacuuming. But for me, not having some giant, you know, 25 foot hose to coil up each time and put away when I'm done using the vacuum was a huge goal that I was looking for with this particular hose. I did not want something that was going to take up a lot of space. I wanted it to be compact and just simple and easy to use. And then I got this standard vacuum accessory kit that came with this telescoping handle here, this wand that attaches to your floor tool, and of course came with a brush and your basic crevice tool and duster. And again, these are all standardized residential vacuum tools. There's nothing special about them for it to work in the RV here. It's just a standardized size on this centralized vac. And then as far as dumping the vacuum when it's full, this is not a bagless unit. It's a traditional bagged unit. And so you just open up this little door here and you can see there is a traditional bag there. It actually has two inlets because remember there's an inlet here on the front and one on the rear. And so the bag has two holes in it, two inlets where you just connect there, and it has a little rubber seal on it to make sure the seal is nice and tight there. But as far as getting these replacement bags, it's such a common model for the RV industry that I've seen them all over Amazon, both from the original manufacturer here, but also third party. So I don't think finding bags on this particular model is ever going to be a problem. All right, last thing I wanted to do is give you an idea of how loud this vacuum is. And I know it's kind of hard to convey that on video. And so I've got a dB meter here, and I'll use this to kind of get a baseline reading when we're quiet, like right now. And so we're too low to read, but I'm guessing it's probably just under 50 decibels. So that's kind of our baseline for when nothing's running, when it's dead quiet in the rig. But let's go ahead and turn the vacuum on and see what the difference is. All right, so now I've turned the vacuum on and I've got to up the meter here. So you can see when we're about, probably about 2.5, 3 feet away, it's reading just at about 95 decibels. So it's, you know, a pretty loud vacuum considering all things. And of course, this is going to be the loudest position. And remember, we're hearing not just the sound of the motor, but the air going through the nozzle here. So let's just walk toward the front of the rig all the way up in the front living room and see the difference. So you can see just by going into the front living room, it's already dropped about 10 decibels, a little bit more than that. And now I'm actually hearing a lot more of the suction, the airflow coming out of the nozzle. And of course this living space is pretty much open to the kitchen down here, so naturally it's going to carry pretty good. Well, let's go back here to the back bedroom where it's a little more closed off, so you kind of get an idea of how that translates on the dB meter. All right, so I've got to adjust the range here, go down to about 80. So now you can see we are registering about 74, 75 when I'm not talking. So that's not too bad. And so this bedroom's a little bit more closed off from the vacuum. And I'd guess we're probably about 15 feet or so from the motorhead right now. I know what you're thinking already. What about outside the rig? I mean, are your neighbors at the campsite going to know that you're OCD with cleaning? Well, let's take a look. We're probably about 25 feet from the motorhead. And right now we're reading about just under 60 decibels when I'm not talking. And just for a baseline, I turn the vacuum off now outside so it's nice and quiet. And that means we're under 50 decibels. So remember, again, it was about 58, just under 60 decibels with the vacuum on, and about 15 to 20 feet or so from the motorhead inside there. So you definitely hear the vacuum when you're on the outside this close, but it's very faint and quiet, and you hear suction basically. Airflow is what you're hearing there. So I don't think it's going to bother your neighbors at adjacent campsites. All right, well, there you have it. Let me answer the final question. Would I do this mod all over again? And the answer is absolutely yes. As I mentioned earlier in the video, this was not the kind of mod that I sought out or planned to do. I really just stumbled upon it due to the $50 price point I mentioned. And granted, I had to spend extra on the dustpan accessory, the hose, the attachments, and so forth. But I still would absolutely do this mod all over again. as the convenience and the ease of use really are nice features in the end when you're camping. There's really nothing I would have done differently if I could do it all over again, but let me know what you think in the comments. Is there something you would have done differently? Maybe you've got an idea that would help others making this particular mod. Let me know in the comments. Well, that's it for our video today. I hope you found it helpful. I will include links in the description below for the specific products and accessories that I featured in the video today. And these are the types of items that may go in and out of stock depending on the supplier and manufacturer. So if you click on these links and maybe it's 6 months from when this video is recorded and they're not available anymore, hopefully it'll at least be a starting point for you to find something similar. Most of these things are just basic household, centralized vacuum accessories and products that work here in the RV centralized vacuum. And so you shouldn't have a problem finding these types of products because they're just so widely available. Now, that being said, on the vacuum motor itself down here that I mentioned earlier, that was a closeout that I found. But I did do a search on eBay and I found a similar seller that I think might be offering perhaps the same thing for almost the same price. And so I will put a link on eBay to that search as well below, and hopefully that'll help you find a good deal and you can snag one of these for your RV. Well, as always, thanks for watching.